Okay, so make sure you take really good notes, copy everything that you see here as you should be doing throughout the various steps of this assignment. So, in paragraph one, you were supposed to give some basic information objectively without any evaluation of key aspects of Aristotle's theory with the focus on concepts that you will now be applying in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. In paragraph 2, so that paragraph 1 had to do with moral theory and the moral elements and moral considerations that you will be using. Paragraph 2 was a non-moral paragraph. It should be filled with non-moral statements. That is, it should not have any statements that say something actually is right or wrong, or that a person actually is good or bad, or that a person is virtuous or unvirtuous, much less a nurse. Paragraph 2 was just supposed to provide some information about a real-world practical affair to which we will now apply what you talked about in paragraph 1. So now that we have paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, what we're going to do, in other words, is apply key ideas, key concepts from paragraph 1, moral theory, to the practical affairs, to people in a practical situation, to think about what it would mean for somebody to be a good nurse with a focus on courage. So in this part of the essay, in parts 3, 4, and 5, we will be applying what we talked about in paragraph 1 to paragraph 2. In doing so, we are going to be doing something called reasoning from the extremes. Now, the video that I added on 3:30, the speaker in that lecture does a good job of visualizing and showing you what it means to not necessarily reason from the extremes, but his visual gives you an idea of what it means to reason from the extremes. And he did a good job, or I should say a decent job, explaining what it means for something to be an extreme. So you might want to watch that video and see what he says in the second half about what does it mean for something to be an extreme in Aristotle's virtue ethics. And if you didn't pull from that for paragraph 1, you should. So what does it mean for something to be an extreme relative to a virtue? So if you add that to your paragraph, you don't already have that, your answer to that question, then make sure that you get that information either from the reading, if you find that information in the reading, or the video. Okay, so that said, what I want to do now is I want to provide a visual, my own visual that I had before I saw that video, which aligns with it and many others, what they come up with for visualizing Aristotle's ethics. So, as you guys know, Aristotle's theory, and as you've already discussed in your first paragraph, which you should have written by now, and by the time you got to this video, includes the notion of a virtue. And of course, you already defined or talked about, wrote a sentence or two about what the word virtue refers to in Aristotle's ethics. And you know that for every virtue, there is a vice. There are at least what we consider 2 vices, I guess, or vici, not sure. Remember that there are 2 kinds of vice and relative to a virtue. So a virtue is what is referred to as the golden mean. Okay, and some people use the words golden mean to refer to what some consider to be the name for a method for trying to figure out what a virtuous person would do. I use the words or the phrase reasoning from the extremes to name a method that one can use to figure out what it is that a good person would do, a virtuous person would do in a particular situation, in a particular circumstance, relevant and relative to who that person is, knows, and is dealing with. So we have virtue, which is a golden mean, and the golden mean is basically a balance. A balance of what? A balance between 2 extremes. So you should be copying this, and you should have balance and then add between 2 extremes. So here to the left, I have noted a vice, an extreme of deficiency. So a deficiency is when you have too little of something that makes you virtuous. On the other side, we have something called a vice, of course. But in this sense, and here we are focusing on, or we are visualizing, presenting via this diagram or this visual, an extreme of excess. So that's when you have too much of something. Think of what the word excess means. Think about what the word deficiency means. The excerpt that I gave you does a pretty good job aligning with what I'm going on now. That is a 3:30 excerpt that I added to, I believe, step 5, and that's the 3 pages that I gave you to help you understand Aristotle. So in another video for this step, I am going to be using these character traits down here to walk you through what it is that you're supposed to be focusing on in terms of character traits in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. For the examples that I use to help you understand what you need to do and what your paragraphs need to look like, I will be reasoning from the extremes that you see here. So the virtue of concern in my examples will be courtesy. And what does it mean to be courteous? What is it to have too little of that which makes you courteous? Well, it's rudeness. If you don't have enough of that which makes you courteous, then you could be considered rude. So that's a deficiency. You don't have enough of whatever it is to be courteous. Now, believe it or not, you might not have heard of this, but you can also have too much of something that makes you courteous. You can have too much of the stuff. You can go overboard with what is necessary and required and sufficient to be courteous, to be a courteous person, to reflect courtesy. And when you do that, you are reflecting what might be called I always get tripped up on this word. So as I was saying, I get tripped up on this word, but it's sycophancy. Just to make sure, and I'm actually expressing intellectual humility, you guys. I am saying I don't remember how to pronounce this word. My knowledge is limited, and really what I'm saying is I have expressed the word, I have said it correctly, but memory can play a role in what we can claim to know. And so I couldn't remember how to pronounce this word. It's interesting to think about how memory is related to knowledge and to think about how that might be related to intellectual humility. So in the moment of this lecture, I could not remember. So does the fact that I can't remember something that I learned prior mean I no longer know it? That's an interesting question from the standpoint of epistemology, the branch of philosophy that focuses on knowledge, but we won't go there. Anyway, I discovered something very cool that I'm going to share with you that will help you in life, especially if English is a second language for you. Maybe you guys already know about this, but I just discovered this. You can Google a word and you type in how do you pronounce whatever word you want to say, and I didn't spell it correctly the first time, but it picked up on it. And then Google, I don't know what it's using, maybe this is Google, will let you practice. It'll say the word for you.
Sycophancy.
It shows you what the mouth looks like.
Sycophancy.
And it shows you the phonetic spelling of the word to help you pronounce it correctly. And guys, you can practice. Let's see if it works. Sycophancy. Now it's analyzing what I said, and it's supposed to give me a report. I tried to say it a little bit incorrectly to see if it would capture what I did incorrectly in trying to pronounce the word. The first time I did this, it told me what was wrong with it told me how to correct my pronunciation of the word. Right now it's taking a little bit of time, so I'll not wait for it. But I think this is a really cool tool, especially if English is your second language. But also, we don't always know how to pronounce words. And so that can help. Anyhow, one reason why I did not remember how to pronounce this word is because I hardly ever use it. So does that mean I'm dumb or stupid? No, it just means I hardly ever use it. Therefore, I don't have the neural network created in my brain to easily retrieve the information. It doesn't mean I'm stupid. It means I just don't have the physiological change in my brain necessary to retrieve information or memories of how to say this word when I use it, since I use it so rarely. So there I am expressing intellectual humility and just letting you guys know that it's okay if you cannot always remember what you learned. The thing is, what do you do with that? What do you do about that? Okay, so aside from that coaching, what I was saying is that the extreme of excess, when you have too much of that, which makes you courteous, you would be expressing sycophancy. And a person who does that is called sycophantic. So someone who expresses the virtue, the balance between two extremes, the golden mean, is expressing courtesy. We would call them courteous. Someone who expresses the vice of somebody who expresses a vice in the extreme of a deficiency, falling short, is expressing rudeness. We would call that person rude. And somebody who is expressing too much of that which makes you courteous is expressing excess, too much of something, going beyond. Sycophancy, that person would be called sycophantic. Okay, so what we're going to be doing, this is really important in terms of thinking about the method of reasoning from the extremes, is we are going to start in paragraph 3 with a vice. To be precise, we are going to focus on extreme of deficiency. I'm going to show you how to do that with the character trait of rudeness. But under here, you should write that you will be focusing on the character trait of cowardice. Okay? So I'm going to draw. Give me a second. Okay. So we will be reasoning from rudeness, in my example, to that of being courteous. But before we do that, we need to reason from sycophancy. So reasoning from the extremes. Do my arrows help you to see what it might mean to reason from the extremes? Okay. Now, what does this entail? This is going to entail 2 steps. Okay. In paragraph 1, okay, so 2 steps. 1 is going to be to define the words that name the character traits you are working with in a given paragraph. The second step for each character trait for each paragraph will be to then apply explicitly and directly significant terms, phrases in the definitions you get for each of the character traits, and to use those terms and phrases to imagine, to speculate, or if you have information, facts, from the research that you did from paragraph 2, what it would look like for someone, in my example, to reflect rudeness, given the definitions that I present. What might it look like for someone to reflect rudeness in a particular context? Then I will define sycophancy, and then I will use keywords and phrases to talk about explicitly how keywords and phrases from my definitions for this, what it might look like for someone to express too much of that which makes one courteous, to express sycophancy, and hence to be sycophantic. Once I have defined these 2 character traits and talked about how someone might reflect these character traits within a particular context, the idea is that I then have an idea of what it might mean for someone to reflect courtesy. So paragraph 3 will focus on a vice or extreme of deficiency. Paragraph 4 will focus on vice on an extreme of excess. And then your paragraph 5 will be enlightened by the fact that you have reasoned through these 2 extremes, and then the definition for courtesy to think about for you it will be courage, but for me it will be courtesy. So again, I'll be using these character traits as my examples, but you guys will be using the character trait of cowardice, courage, and foolhardiness. Okay, so that's the big picture of what's going on with steps 3, 4, and 5. In the next video, in this step video, this component step for step 8, I will be focusing on rules and requirements that apply to paragraphs 3, 4, and 5.